So Dr. Paris, the first one that really was posed here in the last week was, if voters value bipartisanship, what's really driving what we're seeing as such polarization in Washington, according to kind of your research perspective?
Absolutely. So there are a couple things going on in terms of polarization in Washington. And you know, there's a lot of history to this as well. So so first, sort of thinking very generally, right? Members of Congress they don't just have all American voters in their districts, they have specific districts. And one thing that we've seen over the past several years is that many regions, and as a result, many districts, are becoming a bit more politically homogenous. So we're seeing increasingly that sort of many cities are consistently blue, many rural areas are consistently red. We're seeing that states are swinging more definitively in one direction or another. Not all states, but many states. And we're seeing this at a lot of the district level. And sometimes there are bits of this that might be gerrymandering, but in general, when political scientists have looked at gerrymandering, they find that doesn't have a huge influence on polarization. Now, it might be bad for other reasons, and there are certain specific states where it seems like it is going to sort of affect how people's votes translate into who's representing them. So this is not to say that gerrymandering is good, just that gerrymandering doesn't seem to be a big factor in why we've become more polarized. What has been a factor is, to some extent, how people have just sort of moved themselves around and sorted themselves out in the country, in urban and rural areas, and in districts. So that's one piece of what's going on. Another piece of what's going on is what we would call sort of partisan sorting. So people have, over the last several decades, gotten so that their ideology is more clearly related to their party. This did not used to be the case. In the 1950s, you had liberals and conservatives in both parties. So you certainly had a bunch of Southern conservatives in the Democratic Party, and you had a bunch of Northern liberals in the Republican Party. And that is much less the case now. And that happened for a couple of reasons. Some of it having to do with people moving around the country. You know, one of my favorite sort of data points on that I think is a small contributor overall, but you know, one thing that happened was we started having a lot more air conditioning. So a lot of older folks who tend to be a little more conservative started moving to the South. So there were various sort of movement of people that shaped this as well. And also the parties themselves started giving off much clearer cues as to what the party was about and what it was about ideologically. So we've seen the parties become associated with much more distinctly with two different ideologies. We've seen the character of many districts change. We've also seen Congress being sort of very, very competitive, in the sense that control of the chambers has bounced back and forth a number of times in the past few decades. And that wasn't always the case. It used to be that for a good long while that people assumed like the Democrats had a lock on Congress. So when things are super competitive in Congress as to which party controls the chamber, that does create some incentives for parties to not give an inch to each other. It sort of helps create some incentives for them to really fight over every little piece rather than cooperating, because the sense is that any little thing could be the thing that helps you get back the majority or lose the majority. And I should say, none of this is coming from my work. This is coming from a lot of other political scientists who have done some fantastic work on this. Francis Lee is one. Gregory Koger is another. The stuff on partisan sorting is coming from Matt Lewandowski. So there are a lot of great resources out there on sort of how this polarization has taken place. The final thing I would say is that primaries play a role. As districts have become slightly more homogenous, members of Congress have gotten a lot more worried about primary challenges than they have about losing their general election. And so they're much more concerned with pissing off the most active, loudest, and most extreme section of their party, even though those folks are a clear minority when we're looking at the country as a whole, and probably even a minority in the district. But because they're worried that those people will help to support and fund a primary challenger, and then that primary challenger will criticize them in a number of ways that make it hard for them to win re-election, they're very, very hesitant to get on the wrong side of the most intense parts of their base. So I think that's sort of the simplest way to talk about what's going on with polarization.